But let's kick it off with supermarket duopolies. Really, well, it's actually based around the Commerce Commission report that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, but also an article on stuff.co.nz. Supermarket duopoly high prices locking people out of nutrition, health group says. Rather than going through all the exact details of the Health Coalition Aotearoa food, let's just bring on Dr. Lisa Te Morenga, who is the Policy Expert Group co-chairperson, also an associate professor at Massey University, whose research now get this, if you want a person to speak to this exactly, you ready? Whose research relates to supporting individuals, whanau, and communities to achieve good health through being able to access healthy, affordable food. There couldn't be a better person to talk to about this, if you ask me. Lisa, good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Atamari, lovely to join you.
Yeah, I noticed you were at you're in Otago for a while. Me and Chew were just wondering, why did you leave? God's own. It's a hard thing to handle. People actually leave this place, but there you go.
I love Dunedin, and I did not want to leave at all.
What we're going to do to start off with is the story that I just had up on the screen. I do want to play 60 seconds of what Dr. Clark did say about this, because I think that's a part of the conversation. David Clark was talking about the Commerce Commission report, talking about the super profits that they're talking about, and getting asked also about taking GST off fresh fruit and veggies. Let's just give him 60 seconds to hear what he had to say, and then we'll get into the conversation as well.
Well, look, we've received the report from the Commerce Commission and accepted its findings. Its findings were that the supermarkets are making super profits. By its most conservative estimate, that's $1 million a day it's taking out of New Zealanders' pockets in super profits, ahead of what you'd normally expect as profits for that sector. So I have not ruled out going further than the Commerce Commission's recommendations. They've put together, to be fair, a pretty robust package of recommendations, 607 pages, covering off things like covenants on land, and also introducing a regulator. They have a package of measures. We will give those consideration, and as I say, haven't ruled out going further. Sorry, I didn't. Oh, look, we're not considering removing GST off fruit and vegetables at this stage. We want to ensure that when savings are passed on from suppliers to the supermarkets, that they're actually passing on those savings to consumers. And that's the area we're really focused on.
So there you go. That's pretty much all I wanted to put out there. So they want to ensure that the savings that are getting passed on to the suppliers then get passed on to the consumer, and they're not considering at the moment, although I'd be willing to bet it'll change before the next election, taking GST off fresh fruit and veggies. Lisa, why don't you, we'll just kind of throw the floor to you at the moment, and you give us your thoughts around what we're hearing and reading, and then we might jump backwards and forwards with a few questions. So what is your reaction to the cost of food going up? And obviously, as we said, your area of research being having access to healthy, affordable food being more difficult currently.
Yeah. So the supermarket duopoly is a huge factor in the inaffordable or increasing inaffordability of food in New Zealand. Obviously, we're in a global pandemic. There's a whole lot of factors that are happening that we don't have a lot of control of in New Zealand. But we do know that our supermarkets are making twice the amount of profit that supermarkets are making in other countries. And there should be some way that some of those profits can benefit our poorest families, so that they can afford the sort of healthy food that we need to live long, productive lives. We want our kids growing up healthy, successful, so they can pay our superannuation, don't we?
You say there should be some ways, like what? Some ways for those profits to be reduced. Have you some examples? Does your working group kind of go from somewhat to then actually coming up with ways of doing that? Suggestions?
I mean, one of the things our group focuses on is sort of regulatory measures that the government could take to shift the balance between the real super affordability of junk food and the inaffordability of the healthy foods. So that's probably not an issue here. But looking at the supermarkets and what we can do there, we accept some of the previous work and some of the consultation that was done with people for that Commerce Commission report with organisations that really felt strongly that we need a third player in New Zealand, another supermarket, because those two big supermarket chains are really acting in quite an uncompetitive way. So we're not seeing prices come down as much as they could. I think it's promising that David Clark hasn't ruled out doing something about that duopoly, even though the Commerce Commission report says that they think it's too complicated. So I'm going to cross my fingers here that he will go further than the report and make some of those hard choices or hard decisions that need to be made.
I mean, one of the things that has been battered around for many, many years, multiple governments, is removing GST from fruit and vegetables. And everybody's gone, no, that complicates a very easy tax system. It keeps on getting brought up. Is that going to fix everything?
Other countries don't have tax on healthy food like Australia, GST. In some countries, I believe, don't have GST on food at all. I think that it would be good not to have GST on healthy food or food. I mean, I'd like to see GST kept on chocolate and chippies, if only so that would make it less appealing for me to buy as well.
But I think that would be quite easy, though. I mean, if we think about what's in the foods, like if, for example, you said no additives, no preservatives, no colors, GST free. I mean, that's all of your meats, all of your veggies, all of your fruits. You know what I mean? It's like, and it doesn't include your chocolates and your ice cream. And like, I know that there's going to be some preservatives that help keep some meat products, for example, and so there'd be some tutuing in between. But in general, wouldn't that be a way of very easily defining what I know? Like they always talk in the UK about, I think it's called, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a kind of cake which is listed as a biscuit, even though it's a cake, because one of them has tax and one of them doesn't. They can get into those middle grounds. But if you made it like, basically something that comes from a farm, then there's no GST on it, then that would seem to be an easy way to, a farm or from nature. That would be an easy way to make that no GST thing.
It sounds easy in principle, but when we start to look at how we apply these sorts of rules and algorithms for deciding what food should be in and what should be out, it is a lot more complicated. I mean, butter comes from a farm, and we, as nutritionists, we'd rather people didn't eat quite so much butter. And I know there is some disagreement in some circles here, but we do think that too much saturated fat increases risk of heart disease. So we don't want necessarily all things coming from farms to be cheap, do we? And likewise, some things that are processed or packaged, like, I mean, bread is a staple food, it's going to have preservatives and things like that, but it's really important staple for New Zealanders. We have quite a bread-based lunch culture, and we would like people to eat healthier bread than the white stodgy stuff.
Yeah.
But it would still be preserved. You have preservatives and additives in it. So it's not as simple as it might seem.
No, I mean, one thing that I keep on coming back to is, as a country, we produce so much food for export, and all the best stuff heads overseas. And then we've got these companies going, oh, well, you've got to pay the same price in New Zealand as we do overseas because it's the same quality, but we're not getting the export quality stuff. We seem to be sacrificing our land and water to make it. And then we're getting poor quality, expensive stuff in our expensive supermarkets. It blew me away last time I was in the UK, just seeing the range, the quality, and the cheapness of stuff. Like we should be there, surely.
I mean, do bear in mind that in Europe, they do have a lot of food subsidies. So we probably can't do that as a very small country that is dependent on exporting food. We can't afford to have countries block out exports into them. But one thing I think that we should consider as New Zealand is developing a new food strategy. So we don't have a strategy around how we're going to ensure that our own population is able to afford healthy, nutritious food into the future. And that's something different people are starting to work on. One thing I'd like to think about is what can we do to ensure that New Zealanders don't pay more for New Zealand produced foods than companies are selling them overseas. Just that sort of level fairness, because I believe that actually we pay more for some of the foods that New Zealand produces. It's not even that we're paying the same, we're paying more.
No, I used to do a late night radio show, and I'd often, because people would tune in from all over the world, and when like Fonterra came up, we'd be talking about 2 liters worth of milk that you're paying, I don't know, at the time it was 10 years ago, but $4 for, and you get people from Perth going, oh, we pay $1.99 for the same product. And even with the exchange rate, it was still like, half to 2/3 of what we were paying for them. And many people would phone up and go, that fucking plant is 4 kilometers down the road from me. And that would be one of the things that they would be angriest about.
Yeah, I mean, the Australians had, I think, a price war around milk. Every supermarket was trying to get to the cheapest milk in the market. It was a race to the gutter, pretty much. Here in New Zealand, we use alcohol in supermarkets as loss leaders. I mean, there's another attack that you go to the supermarkets. You can't loss lead with alcohol. Try doing it with fruit and veg instead.
Or with soft drinks or chippies or confectionery. That would be a great strategy too. And I think some of those ideas are incorporated into the Commerce Commission report, like trying to make it easier for consumers to afford the healthiest food. But they could definitely go further.
Hey, I'd like to ask a couple of specific questions. The first is the talk about a third player coming in to break up the duopoly. Why do we think that will cause prices to go down? And I mean, I know I'm a bit of a simplistic kind of person here, but if I saw 2 restaurants in the Octagon making bank because they could, and I come in, why wouldn't I just want to make bank like them? Why would I go, I'm going to undercut them and then everyone will come to me? Like, what's the actual reason that third group is then going to cause prices to go down and them not just join in what the other 2 are doing?
Well, I'm not an economist, so you might get a better answer from someone like Bernard Hickey. But, we have a relatively small market, and at the moment, those 2 big players are making a big profit because they've got access to all of that market. And as soon as you've got a bit more competition, you're going to want to steal some of the customers off those other 2 big players, aren't you? So you're probably not going to steal them as a new player in the market by offering the same prices. You're going to have to offer something new to bring those customers over to your business. So, I think that third player would only come in if they could offer lower prices, and then that will drive those other 2 big players.
All right. I see that. Also, I wanted to look real quickly at specifically to do this. Now, this is July of last year, but it's all I could find online. So let's add another 10% to these prices. But looking at what people are paying for their average groceries around the country, it's a lot more expensive in, for example, urban Auckland than it is in even the rest of the North Island, rest of urban North Island. It's like $60 cheaper to get their average groceries. I wanted to, now you said you're not an economist, so maybe this is more an opinion-based question for the 3 of us rather than being able to delve into why that is. But there was a couple of things. Is the government just kicking the can down the street? Because I look at, let's say it's a solo parent with 1 child, let's say, and this is they're urban South Island, they're spending $175 a week. So if the profits of the supermarket go from 12% to 6%, so they save 6% on that, I mean, 10% would be $17. So that's like $8 or $9. Is $8 or $9 a week for that person the difference we're talking about between affordable, healthy food and not? And does it really have to be government intervention to make it to where it becomes affordable? Because if we're talking about a 6% difference between super profits to profits, it's maybe not a huge amount out of each person's weekly spend. And I wonder, when you hear the government going $430 million of profits, they're trying to make it sound bigger and put the blame over there, whereas the only group that can really bring the prices down is the government. So that's kind of my question Is it really ultimately the government that need to solve this problem? And secondly, if we're all buying the same groceries, why is it so much cheaper in the rural area, $257.50 versus $395.80 in the urban Auckland area? And is that something that the government could help out with if it's based on rents or whatever? So either of you, there's just kind of some thoughts to throw out there.
Yeah, well, food cost is just one of the issues that are facing New Zealanders at the moment. And, I think if housing was a lot more affordable, then the cost of food wouldn't be quite so critical. And although I'm not an economist, I would assume that difference in prices between urban Auckland and rural New Zealand reflects the high cost of land and the cost of building and things like that. So, our families in Auckland are being stung, or in Wellington actually, with the very high cost of housing. I mean, bear in mind though that wages will be higher in Auckland and Wellington than they are in rural areas as well, which is probably why we haven't seen a great movement of people from expensive Auckland to cheaper rural New Zealand.
What about the idea of the government being involved? I mean, the government made a temporary choice to make public transport more affordable and petrol more affordable. Ultimately, to make this more affordable, is it ultimately something the government does need to step up to? Or can we trust, for example, bringing the third group in, that private sector can bring prices down as well? Lisa, what do you think?
Well, I think we probably all here would agree that the neoliberal experiment of the 80s and 90s hasn't worked. We're not seeing the trickle down of the money that our wealthiest New Zealanders are earning down to improving the lives of our workers. So yeah, I do think that actually it's time to give up that experiment and come back to doing things a bit more like we used to do. So looking after our most vulnerable families with well-structured social programs. I won't disagree with you there.
No,
Well, I mean,
government policy is the answer.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of chatter about the warehouse group getting involved, and they're sort of umming and ahhing about getting into supermarkets. I mean, the advantage here is it's a New Zealand-owned chain, but it's still a big chain. I guess they have the advantage of having a lot of a big footprint right throughout the country. And if you wanted something to happen quite quickly, that would be the way to do it. But is it the best way?
The food they sell in the warehouse isn't great at the moment, but I'm sure they could change that. I see that Costco is coming into Auckland, and they kind of have that model where you bring in bulk purchases of cheap things so that you can offer them fairly cheaply. So I think the warehouse could do it if they were interested, but that would be up to them. I don't know. Maybe there's something in those contracts that the supermarkets have, those secret covenants they're putting on bits of land around the city that prevent supermarket competitors from coming in. I don't know if that's affecting what the warehouse does, but you might think the warehouse could do something like that.
Yeah. I mean, also they've got the infrastructure there already, don't they? I mean, we all know the red sheds. So, I mean, I was actually in the warehouse in South Dunedin in the weekend getting some boxes for storage, and actually noticed, I think they call it grocery, so it's not fresh fruit and veggie. It is basically chips, chocolate, and soft drinks. Yeah. But there are more aisles than there used to be. Lots of tinned fruit and that kind of stuff in there as well. So maybe there's some some soft launches, some testing the marketplace out there to see what people would and wouldn't buy. And there's your third player who doesn't need to, for example, a Coles or whatever, to come across from Australia and actually start from ground zero. They're already here. They're already in the situation. So maybe that is an answer.
I imagine that changing the fit out of their stores to be able to provide a bigger range of healthier food might be a little bit difficult for them.
Yeah.
They have to put fridges and all sorts of things like that in place.
The other comment that I see, and I guess I'm going to pigeonhole the people that I've seen making this comment is coming from quite a privileged position of people going, oh, you just go to a farmer's market, or you get better prices at a butchery and stuff like that if you go on a certain day. And that's really hard for some families that they're in the jobs that they're working the Saturday mornings where the farmers markets are open, or it's jumping in the car to go to a bakery, a butchery, and the farmers market with the kids in tow and that sort of thing. It's not that there isn't options out there for better pricing. It's making them accessible for everyone, rather than the people that have the time and the ability to traipse across town finding these places.
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys are in Dunedin, aren't you? So we have the farmers market. It's kind of a bit posh, though, isn't it? It's quite crowded. Might not be where everybody's people hang out.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we've got the Porirua, or have had Porirua markets, which are closer to low-income families and quite popular. But you're right, not everyone can make it there on Saturday morning. And not everyone has a car or the transport that's required to come to those locations. And one thing we see with the cost of food for our most vulnerable families is they often live in, our poor suburbs aren't well served by supermarkets anyway. So they're often people without cars or transport are dependent on buying food from a small local store, and the cost of food in those local stores is really determined by that supermarket duopoly who control the cost of wholesale food and who lock those small businesses out. So that is one recommendation the Commerce Commission report has made that will probably be followed through on, is a code of conduct to ensure that those small corner local neighbourhood shops do have access to that cheap wholesale food.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I know some of the local stores, like small veggie and stuff stores in Dunedin actually buy their products just from Countdown. So they don't actually have the suppliers for the groceries to the, not for obviously for the fresh fruit and veg, but for the groceries, they go to those places anyway. Hey, look, we'll leave it. I feel like we've come back to, we've wrapped this nicely, come back to the duopoly being part of the issue there, Lisa. So thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your expertise. Health Coalition Aotearoa Food Policy Expert Group Co-chairperson. It's a fantastic title, very long on your business card though. That is Dr. Lisa Te Morenga. Thank you so much for joining us, and we really appreciate you being on BHN this morning.
Kia ora, thank you for having me.